Alright folks, this is Harris Sultan. Today I'm going to explain the ongoing conflict in Syria, which has now led to the flight of the mad tyrant Bashar al-Assad, who infamously used chemical weapons on his own people. To understand how we got here, we need to go back to the beginning, to the moment that set the entire region ablaze. It all started in a small Tunisian city with the self-immolation of Mohammed Bouazizi, a fruit seller who, after being robbed and assaulted by police, set himself on fire in December 2010. His desperate act was captured and shared across Tunisia, sparking widespread protests that toppled the regime of President Zine al-Abidine Ben Ali, who fled to Saudi Arabia. This marked the start of what would be known as the Arab Spring, a revolutionary wave that spread across the Middle East, from Egypt, where protests ousted dictator Hosni Mubarak, to Libya, Yemen, Bahrain, and beyond. The idea that the West orchestrated this movement is laughable. To all the conspiracy theorists blaming the West for everything, I ask this: did the US tell that Tunisian fruit seller to set himself on fire? The answer is obvious. This was an organic movement born out of local grievances, not some grand Western conspiracy as the anti-Western, Putin propaganda-driven idiots would have you believe. When the winds of the Arab Spring reached Syria, it wasn't a random spark. It began in March 2011 in Dara, where a group of schoolboys aged 15 and younger spray-painted anti-government graffiti on a school wall. Their words were bold: "Freedom and your turn is up, doctor," a jab at Assad, who had trained as an ophthalmologist. The regime's response was brutal. The boys were arrested, interrogated, and tortured for weeks. Some reported being hung from walls and electrocuted with metal prods on the orders of Atif Najib, the head of security in Dara and Assad's cousin. Remember, they were just kids. When the boys were released, protests had already erupted in Damascus and Aleppo. The people had reached their breaking point, with decades of grievances from censorship to poverty and surveillance. Assad responded as expected, with bullets. Live fire, mass arrests, torture, and extrajudicial killings became the norm. Tanks were rolled in, and whole towns were starved of food, water, and medical supplies. Now let me ask you this: did the West tell those schoolboys to paint that graffiti on the wall? Do you genuinely believe it had nothing to do with the revolutionary fervor they witnessed in neighboring countries? Throughout history, revolutions have occurred, and while it might be easy and superficial to say, "Oh, the West did it," such a claim is not grounded in reality. Evil America is behind everything. Seriously, don't get your information from propaganda paid grifters on X. Anyway, let's continue, as I promised to give you the full facts. After all this upheaval and the brutal crackdown by Assad's regime, global powers intervened. The West had a choice: stop the brutal crackdown of a mad dictator on its own people, or look the other way. I have often said that I am a strong interventionist. The West, led by the US, has an obligation to support those whose hearts yearn for freedom and democracy. We cannot look the other way when brutal dictators massacre their own civilians. So, in July 2011, defectors from Assad's army formed the Free Syrian Army, or the FSA. Turkey gave them sanctuary and a political counterpart. The Syrian National Coalition was established in Istanbul with support from countries like the US, UK, Saudi Arabia, and the UAE. But infighting among the opposition militias allowed more Islamist factions to gain control, particularly Jabhat al-Nusra, al-Qaeda's Syrian branch, and later ISIS, which seized vast territory in Syria and Iraq by 2014. This is where the claim that the US and Israel created ISIS falls apart, as it's clear that wasn't the intention. Instead, it was a tragic and unintended consequence of doing the right thing, which was to stop a tyrant from massacring his own people. The entrance of Russia, Iran, and Hezbollah in 2015 tipped the scales in Assad's favor. Russia launched airstrikes, Iran sent soldiers and generals, and Hezbollah's fighters bolstered Assad's ground forces. By 2016, Assad's forces had retaken Aleppo, a major turning point. By 2021, he controlled 70% of the country, while Kurdish SDF forces controlled the northeast. The rebel stronghold remained in Idlib, led by Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, HTS, a faction born from Jabhat al-Nusra, but now it is trying to distance itself from al-Qaeda. Just when it seemed Assad had cemented his grip on power, the Syrian civil war erupted again in late November 2024. This time, it wasn't the Free Syrian Army or ISIS leading the charge, it was HTS. They launched a massive offensive, taking control of key towns and villages in the northwest, as well as military bases. Their most dramatic win was the capture of Aleppo on November 27, 2024. The offensive was well coordinated. HTS leader Abu Muhammad al-Jolani, real name Ahmed al-Shara, declared that the goal was to overthrow Assad. By December 5, 2024, he gave an exclusive interview to CNN where he vowed to protect minorities and claimed his fighters had no intentions of erasing any group. But human rights groups were already documenting abductions, torture, and attacks on liquor shops, the usual Islamist behavior. They can't help themselves because this is what Islam teaches. It seeks total domination of all people, enforced brutally and violently if necessary. At least with Christians and Jews, they can be reduced to second-class citizens known as dhimmis in Islam. However, polytheists and those not born from the so-called Abrahamic religions are given no such option. They must either convert to Islam or lose their necks. They are not even afforded the status of second-class citizens. That's the nature of Islam. HTS was not alone. They were joined by groups like al-Sham, known for calling for an Islamic state ruled by Sharia, and factions of the Syrian National Army SNA, which operates as a proxy of Turkey. It's important to note that the Syrian National Coalition SNC, which I mentioned earlier and was supported by the US and likely had factions trained by the CIA, is not the same as the Syrian National Army of today, which is entirely a Turkish-based proxy force. With his forces retreating, Assad was left isolated. Russia withdrew from Syria, evacuating its naval fleet from Tartus. By December 7, 2024, Iran's Quds Force generals had fled to Iraq with one commander stating, "We cannot fight if Syria's army refuses to fight." Meanwhile, Syrian troops abandoned Aleppo on November 30th, leaving behind weapons, tanks, and ammunitions. Videos of deserting soldiers and abandoned equipment circulated online, symbolizing the collapse of Assad's control. But December 8, HTS fighters marched into Damascus, declaring the city free of the tyrant Bashar al-Assad. When your own soldiers start abandoning you, it proves that even they no longer view your rule as legitimate. This is the reason why Ukrainian fighters are still fighting, because they believe in their government, they believe in their democracy. But the same cannot be said about Bashar al-Assad or Ashraf Ghani of Afghanistan. This latest escalation and takeover is purely the design of Turkey, which is in fact tired of hosting Syrian refugees. The US and the West had no role in this, but the sore losers in the Muslim world who blame America for everything fail to see this reality. As for you Westerners living in the West, don't be fools like this woman.
So fundamentally, you believe the Syrian government then over the British government on this one?
Of course, of course.
You believe Assad over Theresa May?
I do, yes.
You believe a murderer over the Prime Minister of Britain?
He's not a murderer. He's the president of a country, for God's sake.
So he hasn't murdered anyone then?
No. What do you mean? Personally, no. But Theresa May gave the order to bomb Syria without anyone say so.
Is President Assad responsible for the deaths in Syria of his own people?
No, he's not. The opposition is, and Britain is, and France is, and America is.
Is President Assad a good person?
Yes, he is. Yes. He's a very good man. And he's a doctor, for heaven's sake. Do you think he goes around killing Syrian people?
At the time of recording of this video, no one knows where Bashar al-Assad is. Rumors of a plane crash carrying Assad spread after Flight Radar 24 reported that a flight had taken off from Damascus but later vanished. Another flight bound for the UAE was believed to be carrying Assad, but UAE officials declined to comment. Syrian army officers claimed a third plane had lost altitude and vanished, but no wreckage was reported. As of now, Assad's fate is unknown, but I think he's probably run back to his master Putin in Russia. Despite his brutality, Putin has shown that he takes care of his puppets even after they lose power, like Viktor Yanukovych, who fled Ukraine after 4 million brave Ukrainians staged a revolution in 2014. Yanukovych is now living safely in Russia. Similarly, when the Belarusian people eventually oust Putin's last puppet in Europe, Alexander Lukashenko, he'll likely run to Putin as well, and Putin will protect him. Putin does this to instill confidence in his future puppets. After all, who would want a master that abandons them when things go south, right? The fall of Assad has triggered a global media frenzy. Donald Trump posted on Truth Social stating, "Syria is a mess, but it is not our fight. Let it play out." Unlike me, Trump is not an interventionist. Something I don't like about him, but I get it. Qatar and China called for caution and stability. China is also a non-interventionist state. It doesn't care who it does business with, whether you're a mass-murdering tyrant or a humane democracy. China remains indifferent. France's Emmanuel Macron welcomed the fall of the barbaric state, while Germany's Olaf Scholz called it good news. Turkey's foreign minister urged opposition groups to unite, but maintained his focus on the Kurdish PKK. Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu linked Assad's fall to Israel's airstrikes on Hezbollah and IRGC targets in Syria after Hamas's attacks on October 7, 2023. Netanyahu took credit for triggering the chain reaction that caused Assad's collapse, and it is true. Assad's regime was bolstered by Russia and Iran. Russia, as you know, is busy in Ukraine, where it has already lost nearly 700,000 soldiers, and Iran's proxies Hamas and Hezbollah have been decimated in their respective countries. So, Israel does deserve some credit. However, I don't think that they planned things to work out that way. Spare a moment for all those Islamist propagandists who, despite being destroyed in Gaza and Lebanon, continue to claim some sort of victory only to see everything around them reduced to rubble. Islamist propagandists are a special bunch. They seem to believe that declaring victory on social media will somehow translate into a real-world victory. With Damascus in HTS's hands and Assad gone, questions about Syria's future loom large. Will it follow the path of Afghanistan, where the Taliban seized control after the US withdrawal? Will the Islamist hardliners impose strict Sharia rule? Or could we see some form of unity? As you probably know, my obvious prediction is that we are going to see the most puritanical form of Sharia in Syria, worse than Afghanistan. Once brutal videos of public execution start circulating online, all those lipstick Muslims who try to portray Sharia as a great divine moral code will be heard saying, "Oh, this is not real Islam. They don't know what true Islam is." But in reality, these ignorant fools know nothing about real Islam. I challenge anyone to prove that anything ISIS or the Taliban did was not done by Muhammad or his companions. This is why Islamic scholars often agree with me on Sharia. It's always the lipstick Muslims who claim Sharia doesn't include this or that. US National Security Advisor Jake Sullivan has warned of HTS's objectives, saying, "We have real concerns about the designs and objectives of this organization. Already, social media shows HTS fighters destroying liquor shops and reports of girls being abducted. Minority groups fear persecution, despite Jolani's assurances." So what have we learned? The Syrian civil war has come full circle. From protests sparked by a group of schoolboys in 2011 to a brutal 13-year-old civil war, and now to the fall of Bashar al-Assad. But this isn't a simple victory for freedom and democracy. It's a power grab by hardline Islamist groups. The collapse of the regime doesn't mean the end of war. It might just be the beginning of another. We've seen it before, from Libya to Afghanistan. The hope is for stability, but history warns us to be cautious. One thing is for sure. Assad's rule is over, and Syria's future is now in the hands of those who fought to take it. So now it's your turn. What do you think is going to happen in Syria in the coming months? Is HTS going to be another menace like ISIS or the Taliban? Let me know in the comments below. And make sure to hit the like button so this video does well. You can support the channel by buying merchandise from harrysalt.com. You can also support this channel by becoming a member or patron on patreon.com/harrysultan, where you get to see videos like these before they're released to the public. If not, just simply buy me a coffee on buymeacoffee.com/harrysultan. Your support is absolutely vital for this channel to keep going. Until next time, ta-da. If you'd like to support my work, you can become my patron by going to patreon.com/harrysultan, or you can simply buy me a coffee.